about to do a little dive, and we're going to go into the Middle Ages. Ooh, would it be cool if I had like an amazing transition
Yes.
to go to the Middle Ages? Okay, JJ, here's the amazing transition. We're going to go auto, and then here we go to the Middle Ages. Are you impressed?
Very.
Yeah, that's really what you wanted right there, is to
Yeah.
be able to go to the Middle Ages. And this is not working. There we go. Now I'm in the here. So we're going to go historical here for a second. Middle Ages is obviously a time that we need to talk about, because this is when we start having the beginning of music history. Now, of course, there was music before the Middle Ages. There's only one problem, is that no one wrote anything down. And of course, I'm going very Europe-centric about this, because it just so happens that the instruments that we play are based in Europe. And the music that we play is based in Europe, so it's kind of hard to get away from this. I'm sure you guys know, especially since you've had me in class over the years, that like, man, I love music from all around the world. And there's many traditions that very much rival what we call European classical music. But, well, this is kind of the basics. So a quick history of the Middle Ages. First of all, we end up with the collapse of the Roman Empire. So back in the year 500, the Roman Empire totally falls apart, and we end up with this term called the Middle Ages, and it spans about 1,000 years. Okay, one thing about this, it's really hard to take apart the fact that the early church is also the thing that wrote down all the music. So the music that we have left over from 1,000 years ago literally is the church music, because no one else wrote anything down. It was like, that was the center of basically the intellect, of Europe. The smartest people in Europe became priests, and then those priests learned how to write, and then they would write books and stuff. Of course, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, that's basically like the government falling apart. Only the church was left. So, and by the year 600, the entire area of Europe was pretty much Christian. And the majority of surviving and flourishing music is from the church. And we have a word for this, and the word is sacred. The word is sacred. Okay. So let's take a look at a map here really quick. This is the Roman Empire. And if I turn off my thing over here, you can see that the Roman Empire went all the way down into Egypt, took over, good northwestern part of the Middle East, all of Turkey, all the way up, all the way up over here. If you check this out, all the way up to London, and into England. Actually, London was originally a Roman colony, from my understanding, all along North Africa here. And then when the Roman Empire fell apart, it's like the church stayed, and like everything turned into this, which is very confusing. So it turned into the Eastern Roman Empire, and there's all these little tiny bits. Look what happened to England up there, man. Like, they turned in all sorts of little bits with different people that are in charge. Imagine that you went from this to absolute chaos. That you have a big problem on your hands. And let's take a look. So big picture stuff here. A majority of the music that we have from this time is, of course, from the church, because that was the thing that was keeping all of these little bits together. It's sacred, because that's our word for it. Of course, the church is paying for everything. It's paying for the monks to be able to sing, and paying for the monks to be able to write things down. And the schools back then, the schools were also part of the church. Okay, it wasn't like we have public schools and then church schools like we do nowadays. I'm sure you have friends who go to St. Patrick's or something like that, or know people. Like, totally different back then. Literally, the only schools were the church schools. And then, but as you would go to church, I'm sure if you guys have ever been to church now, like, it's pretty musical. They have music happening there, and there's an order to it, and notation in the church led to preservation. So let's kind of go forward. So we have something that's called chant. I'm not going to get too into what chant is, but have you guys ever heard of the term syllable? Have you ever heard of that term, JJ?
Yes.
Syllable. What syllable means is that, like, while you're singing, you would change the note for every syllable of the text. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
so if I were to make up a song, like, I am making up a song, every single time I sing a new part of the word, I change the note. Okay. There's another term that's called melismatic. And we don't really hear that word so much now, melisma. And what it is, it's like when you take one syllable and you add a bunch of notes inside of it. And a good example is if you go to a church service around the holidays, around Christmas time. Have you ever heard the song Gloria? Have you ever heard that, JJ? Gloria.
Yes.
It's one syllable. Glow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of notes. I mean, that's like 25 notes for one syllable. The lyricist for for that particular song made a lot of money per word, if you know what I mean. Not a lot of words, a lot of notes. So that's what we call melismatic. And so listening to the music of the Middle Ages, we have to kind of understand this. Now we're going to check out something that's called plain chant. Okay, this is the old style that we have. We have some plain chant notation that's right here. And look at this. Like, man, we have all these square notes. And we have 4 lines on our staff rather than the whole 5 lines that you see here. But JJ, do you see some like strange notation on this picture? Take a look. What do you see on there? Can you describe it for me?
I mean, all the notes are squares.
Yeah.
That's kind of, and then, like you said, like the 4 lines and other, like the writing in between the lines, like the 3 vertical, like up and down lines.
Yeah. And so those are all like slides and stuff. Isn't that crazy? So there's all these like crazy notes. By the way, the reason that they're squares has to do with calligraphy. Have you ever done calligraphy before?
No.
So what calligraphy is, you end up with like a flat tip, and you could take that. It's almost like a marker, really, and you would like slide that flat tip across, and it would make a perfect little square. And of course, back then, they're writing calligraphy all the time because they didn't have computers. They're not typing out the music like we do nowadays. They don't have a pencil because they hadn't invented graphite yet. They're taking essentially a feather with a flat tip, and then they could make they could take that flat tip and go, and it would turn into a square, or they would make a dip down. There's all these different rules for notation. There's people out there that actually study this. These are called neumes. Okay, the original note heads were called neumes, and it represents basically pitches and rhythmic value. And obviously, notation helps us no longer pass the songs via ear and via singing, but creates like a document. So we can then look at this song and not have it, like a giant game of historical telephone. That's not happening. We can actually just read it and go, okay, this is what we think it sounds like. Now, what's funny enough is that humans are really good at repeating things absolutely perfectly. So I think when we talk about oral transmission from one person to another, we think it's like a giant game of historical telephone, and that's a bad thing. But actually, people are really good. Like, imagine all these old stories that you hear. Those have been passed on for maybe even thousands of years. So something to think about. Let's check out a little bit of plain chant here. This is something that's called a Kyrie. It's a part of a church service, and it's from the 14th century. Now, remember the century thing? Like when you say 14th, you're actually talking about 1300s. Okay. The composer's name is lost to time. We don't know who this is. We don't know who wrote it. Just like some of your homework, they forgot to put their name on it. But we still have the document somewhere, and it's a plain chant, and what's called monophonic. Monophonic. What do you think monophonic means, JJ?
By look of it means one sound, like continuous.
Yeah. And so instead of having like, a saxophone part and a clarinet part and a flute part in a band, that's not monophonic. That's polyphonic. They all play different things, right? Monophonic means that like literally everyone sings the same thing. We got 20 people. They all sing the same thing. That's monophonic. So let's take a listen to this. This is, basically 800-year-old church music. So here we go. Kyrie. Wow, that's really loud. Now, this is also melismatic. They're taking the Kyrie and they're stretching out those syllables. And you also have to imagine, too, this would have been sung in a cathedral, in a church with really, really echoey acoustics and so forth. So It's not like you can sing the words really fast and the person on the other side of the cathedral is going to be able to hear you. You kind of have to go a little bit more slowly. You know, you got to sing it real slow for the people on the back. So this is a good example of plain chant, and you know I think the name works out, right? Is it pretty plain?
Yeah.
Yeah. To our modern ears, I would agree. Yeah, it's pretty plain. Cool. Let's check out the next thing. What else we got here? Okay. Why is this not? All right. So here is a book. JJ, if you're to take a look at this picture, how big do you think this book is?
Probably pretty big.
I'll give you a clue here. It's really big, JJ. We're talking maybe like 3 feet. 3 feet tall and maybe like 6 feet across.
That's kind of a big book.
Yeah. So you guys are always complaining about how heavy your backpacks are.
Yeah.
Could you imagine? Yeah, you can't carry this thing to school, man. This thing stays at the church. And take a look if you look at the very first words on there, JJ, what do you think those words are made out
of? Probably like what you were saying earlier with like the feather and how it was like flattened off. Probably something like that.
It's a good guess, but that's not actually what the top. And I'm talking about the ones that are near the red box.
The red.
So take a look at the red box there.
I don't know, actually.
It's gold.
Now, yeah, that makes sense.
Gold leaf. Yeah. So, and you got to figure it, like some little monk back in the 1300s, 1400s spent a whole lot of time on this. Like, this is a serious piece of artwork. And these things are all over Europe. This is a very large book, and this is how people would learn how to sing the music. So kind of similar to what we see nowadays. We have words that are in there. We have obviously the neumes, and that's similar, but there's a whole level of artistic complexity if you start looking at this. We got little people, we got little angels and important, biblical figures surrounding this, and it shows you maybe how important, what an important document this is for like everybody within the church. And by the way, the reason these books were so big is so you could put a whole choir. You could put 20 people around this book and maybe like a priest with a pointer, and they would point to the words and everyone would sing it all together monophonically, right? And then, you have yourself a church service. And these books were...
language is that?
It's Latin.
Latin.
Yes. And you have to remember, because this is older Europe, the Latin-based languages that we have are Italian and French and Spanish. And I think there's another one, not German. German is not a Latin-based language, but Latin was common across all of Europe. And